Two. Hey, everyone on Zoom. In case you didn't catch that last one, we're just going to hold up for a minute and we'll be there soon.
Mic up here. Do not take that mic with you. One mic at a time.
Oh, the mic's up.
The mic's up there. Yeah, you can just. So Doug's going to give you a little intro, and then I'll throw to you, Fenway, and you can take your place whenever you're ready. When you're up there, we're good.
I'll walk up there in a second. Okay, so we're ready to go.
We're ready to go whenever you're ready.
Okay, then go.
All right.
Good. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, the Responsible AI Curve. That's the Applied AI Institute's Interdisciplinary Playbook for Development and Deployment. And to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from fourth space, and we are located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Here at Fourth Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge by co-creating daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things in development across the university. For those of you joining us on Zoom, we're running this as a live stream meeting, so we welcome comments, questions, anything in the chat. We'll get that to the people in the room. And for those of you in the space, if you'd like to participate, just so that everyone can hear, just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone over to you. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to the co-director of the Applied AI Institute, Fenwick McKelvey. Fenwick, welcome back.
Hi, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here today. It's really awesome to see so many familiar faces and to have the support of the Concordia community. This today is a really exciting event. So let me re-say that. Thank you all so much for being here today. I really appreciate seeing so many familiar faces and to be able to share what we're doing at the Applied AI Institute about responsible AI. One of the things that I think is quite important for our institute is the fact that we hold, I think, interdisciplinary research seriously, and that's a challenge. And I think that's one of the challenges that's well met by Concordia more broadly is how do we make this intersection between society and technology, trying to understand these linkages between artificial intelligence and how it meets the world. And these questions about artificial intelligence and developing interdisciplinary research is precisely what we've been working on around the questions of responsible AI. So many of you might have met at our AGM, one of our newest members of our team, Meaghan Wester, our responsible AI coordinator. But really today, this is the chance to meet Meaghan and to see what work we've been doing around responsible AI. I think it's something that I hope faculty realizes the value is that what we're trying to do at the Institute is position ourselves as leaders in a fast-moving, emergent field about responsible artificial intelligence development and trying to do so in such a way that capitalizes on Concordia's strengths in terms of being able to bridge its expertise in kind of critical technology studies, as well as with engineering and the applications and applied work that is kind of throughout our different programs. And so with that, this workshop is a helpful introduction to how we are trying to operationalize responsible AI. And that's something which is not only conceptual with our technical team, it's something that's being integrated into our work. And that's something that hopefully this workshop helps you understand, but also helps you understand this is the type of support that's there. And it's for faculty members who might be interested. It's also members of the wider Concordia community. This is something that we want to know is a resource that can be there to help you as we navigate together these very complex matters about the responsible development of AI, which seems to be a more confronting and daunting challenge every day. So with that, I'd like to pass it over to Meaghan, who will begin the presentation. Thank her and thank you for being here. And again, remind you all that this is something that is a resource. It's something that the Institute is trying to define as a core entity, a core part of our identity, but also is something that will be a benefit to the wider Concordia community. So please don't be a stranger. Please come talk to us. Come think about how we can grow this community around responsible AI together. So thank you, and I'll pass it over to Meaghan Wester now.
Well, thank you, Fenwick, for the introduction, and thank you, everyone. Welcome. Our time together will be spent in 2 blocks. I'll first give a short presentation about the work that I've been doing, as Fenwick mentioned, with our technical team and the tools that I've created to integrate the responsible AI into our practice. And then the second part will be a workshop where the teams here in person and online will get to work through these tools and hopefully get some feedback on that. So to give a bit more context about how, oh, I'm realizing I haven't shared the slides. Responsible AI curve. All right. So to give you a bit of context about how these tools emerged, how we're working through these ideas. I will first introduce how I approach politics and technology, situate the growing field of responsible AI, and teach you my approach to responsible AI. So in the last few years, when we think and discuss AI ethics and regulation, we usually start with stories of emergency, disruptions, and regulation playing catch up. But I would like to start with other stories of design choices and regulation. So the first story in Robert Caro wrote in 1974, The Power Broker, a massive biography on Robert Moses. And for those of you who are not familiar, Robert Moses was an urban planner. And throughout this book, Caro details just how profoundly Moses shaped New Yorkers' lives through the construction of parks, bridges, parkways, without ever being elected. And one of Caro's most famous depiction of the urban planner, made even more famous by Langdon Winner in the field of infrastructure studies and STS, was the story of the low-hanging bridges in Long Island. So Caro makes a point to underscore how the seemingly benign design choice to make bridges height only low enough so that cars could go through actually actively kept buses and incidentally transit users who were predominantly poor and Black New Yorkers out of these spaces that Moses designed. And so building bridges for cars effectively enforced Jim Crow dynamics in the city. And Moses understood the power of infrastructure because, as when Caro interviewed Moses' close associate and former chief engineer, he said, legislation can always be changed. It's very hard to tear down a bridge once it has been, once it's up. So this first story speaks to design choices being made in the space within what regulation allows, that nonetheless enforces specific sets of values. I would like you to hold this first story as I go into the second one. The second story is about how regulation leads to specific design choices. In her 2019 book, Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men, Carolyn Criado Perez outlines innumerable examples of how men are understood as the design user and as the default in science, design, and data gathering in so many different ways. One striking example she gives is in car crash testing with the seatbelts. Regulation doesn't require testing the way women's physiognomy receives impact and thus are protected. So car designs and regulation for safety testing use car crash test dummies that are based on the average man. And as a result, there is a data gap about how women's physiognomies receive impact and also how they are impacted when there's an impact. But this second story underscore is the space that regulation carves out and thus the design decisions that are made and the very tangible effects that they have. And both stories also speak to the way that design choices embed values in system and how politics are embedded in technical systems. So how do hidden politics become public? These examples of the car seat, of the seat belt and of the bridges are good examples of these ways that the politics are not just hidden, but especially in the case of AI regulation, different solutions embody different values. So the lack of clear path forward, especially in Canada, means that the work of responsible AI is not clear, nor will it be clear for many years to come, as I will outline a bit more how the landscape is changing and how different solutions create different conduit. So standards, laws, ethics, and protocols are all different solutions to responsible AI with different sets of values. So just yesterday, the EU AI Act officially passed. It is anticipated to be rolled out much like the GDPR in that a domino effect will ensue of other legislation being passed to remain EU compliant. And we are likely to see this domino effect here in Canada as well in our changing landscape already. In the Canadian context, the Omnibus C27 is currently before committee. The proposed bill is reforming the Privacy Act, the Consumer Protection Act, and bringing forth the AI bill, bringing forth an AI bill component as well. Many limits have been raised on the bill, namely how high risk is not well defined and remains to be, the failure to consult First Nations who hold a right to data sovereignty, and that the AI commissioner will sit within industry, science, and economic development department. Other types of regulation and that is part of the governance landscape in Canada are also the ways that standards and such as ISO and IEEE are being crafted and rolled out as well. There's also many declarations and self-guiding principles that exist. And given how far-reaching AI is in many aspects of our lives, at the individual level, the community, and our institutions, it is now widely held consensus that private actors' self-commitment is not sufficient and it falls short. And as such, regulation that ensures the protection of the Charter's rights is necessary. However, as we stand, the regulation are often broad, and much like principles, there's a lot of gray area in how to operationalize them. On the opposite end of the spectrum, narrowly defined technical recommendations often fall short to capturing the complexity of the way AI system comes from the world and goes back into it. So that leaves us similarly to the space that I outlined with the two stories at the beginning, where decisions need to be made in this gray area. And we are thinking about how to operationalize responsible AI in this space. So as the responsible AI coordinator at the Institute, I needed to think of tools of how to deal with these four problems. So the vastness of the field of responsible AI, the emergent regulations, the prevalence of non-actionable principles, and the often narrowly defined technical recommendation. So I will walk you through two of the tools that we've created. And then, as I mentioned, we'll go into the workshop portion and you'll get to work through them. So the first tool is what we affectionately call the responsible AI curve. The notion of AI lifecycle usually refers to the very narrow stages between data gathering, pre-processing, training the model, and deploying the model. And thinking of AI lifecycle in this very narrow way fails to capture many of the considerations that come before and after these steps. So we started with a very simple phrase: AI comes from the world and goes back into it. There are some upstream considerations to building a model, and there are some downstream considerations. From the extraction of minerals and the data workers' labor condition, to the politics of search engine optimization, public procurement of AI systems, and the social systems that are changed by the integration of AI systems. This curve also holds the reality that many disciplines do work on responsible AI in vastly different disciplines and areas, but puts them in relation of that is not a competition, but a complementarity. Similarly, there are regulations that tackle different aspects and segments of the curve, some that are upstream, some that are downstream, and some that are within the more traditional sense of AI lifecycle. So this curve is a visual tool and a visual cue that we go back to remind ourselves of the wideness of the considerations that we need to account for and strive to account for. As it stands, it's not exhaustive. It's already very busy visually, but as a conceptual tool, it does a lot. It holds the potential infinity of research on various aspects of responsible AI research. And as I mentioned, it frames them as complementary rather than competing with one another. It reminds us of the complexity of AI lifecycle. And again, it reminds us that AI comes from the world and goes back into it. And lastly, something that I think is quite visually is a good visual reminder is much like the history of the bell curve itself. AI systems impose order, often classify and rank. And the history of the bell curve and the concept of the normal is one of racism, ableism, and reactionary politics. And as AI systems are always inherently backwards looking in the sense that they are built from data of the world as it is and as it was, they also hold the potential to reinscribe these systems as a default. So it's a reminder of that as well. So now the second tool addresses some of the other problems that I mentioned earlier, namely, how do we operationalize these ideas from things that are very abstract to day-to-day practice? And after speaking with our technical team and witnessing how we address a need with an AI solution, it became clear that the key questions that were asked were, can we build this and how? And how to integrate or systematically think of questions such as, should we build this? And if so, how? Was much less straightforward, and not for a fault of opening, but just for a fault of not having a process to organize all of these questions. And so we started to flesh out what types of questions we wanted to be asking and how to organize them. And I want to give a shout out here to the Indigenous Protocol for Artificial Intelligence position paper, and specifically Susan Kite's paper on how to build anything ethically, because it was really a huge part of how we started organizing our ideas around the different dimensions and the questions that we wanted to ask ourselves. So the 6 dimensions, we think of them as axes of questioning that we hold throughout the process. The first 2 are often conflated in other sets of principles, but here we wanted to hold them separately. So thinking of impact as, again, reminding ourselves of the long AI lifecycle. Where is the system coming from? Where will it go back to? Who will the system benefit? Who may systematically be harmed by this system? Bias, the bias dimension allows us to ask a different set of questions. So first, of course, it allows us to establish data provenance and data quality, but also it allows us to stop and think about how has this data and technical field historically been used? Is our current use reinscribing these historical dynamics? Are these historical dynamics desirable? And if not, can the architecture, data, threshold, logics, values be amended to produce a desirable social dynamic? The next 2 dimensions are free software and sustainability. Free and open software have a long and rich history that has been complicated with the recent political economy of AI. And so while recognizing that, we are asking questions such as, are we leading to vendor lock-in? Are we promoting the use of open and free software? The dimension of sustainability is around what happens in the lab, but also outside the lab. So what human, energetic, environmental, economic resources will be required for this project? And is it wise to spend it in that way? The last 2 dimensions are standards and regulations. So this dimension really speaks to the context that I mentioned earlier and allows us to ask questions such as, is the system considered high risk in the Canadian legislation context? Is it considered high risk in the EU legislation context? Do we consider it high risk beyond the scope of the law? Why do we choose to build it anyway? And the last dimension is maintenance. So this one has to do more with our concerns for social and technical obsolescence. And it allows us to ask questions such as, are the humans interacting with the system and its output notified? What are the recommendations to upkeep and dispose of the model? So these are to give you a sense of the types of questions that these tools allow us to ask. And as I mentioned, together, the dimension and the responsible AI curve are tools that we use to find answers, find solutions, and think together. And in the next portion of our time together today, we will do a workshop, and you will get to try them, to try to think through them as teams with a scenario. So without further ado, let's do an icebreaker for the people in the room. I just wanted to have a visual cue. So as a transition period, I would invite audience members who are comfortable to loosely place themselves on the AI. There will be a mic going around.
Sorry, everyone. We're gonna pass a microphone around, and hold on a second. Just let me share my screen from this desk.
Wonderful.
And just gonna fix that screen. Just gonna clear it for a moment. No. Hey, there we go. Infinite. So if we pass the microphone around, Megan will direct us here. I will just kind of place a dot where you think your work, Megan, you can explain this better, where you feel you land on the curve. And we'll kind of build a little visual of that, where we are in the room that way.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Doug.
You lead, Megan. I'm just driving here. Maybe we could start by bringing the mic around to the first table. Just direct me where you think it should go.
There's no right or wrong answer.
No,
Anyone here at the first table up front? Anyone have any ideas?
and we go first. Thank you.
I mean, it's interesting for me because, you know, where do I fit myself on this stack? And I feel like I'd be at the end. So I'd be like very far to the right, because a lot of what I'm doing as an academic is just looking at the consequences in this kind of public trust, community impact, and trying to understand it. But one of the things that I'm really kind of interested in is being more involved at the other side about how some of these concerns might impact the earlier stage at the start of the curve. So for right now, I think I'm on this kind of far right, but I'd like to, you know, and I'm learning from our technical team how to be a bit more involved on the left-hand side.
Is there anyone who thinks they can place themselves on the curve right now? You can raise your hand. We can get you a mic. Anyone have any ideas?
Oh, there's some raised hands in the Zoom. I see that. Hold on one second.
I think I'm exactly the opposite of Fen. I'm on the left side on the comes from the world.
All
As
the
a-
way, we tell it
All
far.
the way,
far
because I'm
left.
a writer, a creative person.
Okay.
Feeding the algorithms.
Wonderful. I saw a hand over here, I think. Yep.
Yeah, I think I've been involved in a project that's gone through a lot of aspects of this curve, and I've been lucky to touch a number of them, but currently I would put myself at community impact
Community impact is
over on the far right, I think.
all right. Now I see it. Here we go. Great. Thank you.
We had
Maybe it was an Alexander on Zoom. Sorry, I'm driving over here. I
Yeah.
can't see the Zoom, but what
Hello. I think I would be in standards and conformity assessment, more or less. My research was in explainable AI. So taking AI systems that already exist and seeing if we can understand why they're doing what they're doing.
fantastic.
wonderful. Thank you.
I've been working with Fenwick on the last part a lot, but think I'm making the transition towards gentrification because I'm working a lot with artists. And as we know, they are the reason that places get gentrified. No, but seriously, I think somewhere around design justice, thinking through art and creative practice of how these systems could be designed differently.
Design justice. There we go. I should have read this more carefully.
Oh yeah, more gentrification.
Yeah, is that where you imagine yourself, or a little bit further to the left? Where were you? Great.
Okay.
Well, that's where I want.
Right.
Yeah, we can have aspirational placements on the curve too.
Oh, there we go.
Anyone else? Oh, yes.
Being the MLOps engineer at the Applied AI Institute, I guess I'll go at the deployment. Yeah.
Great.
Clicker to the left. Yeah.
That's pointing is what really helped me. Thank you. We had a question on Zoom that I think that was asking Megan where you would be on the curve. Everywhere.
It's a good question. Well, prior to this, my research was on public procurement of AI systems. I would probably be close to also on the right. We have procurement right next to
Procurement.
deployment.
Nice. One behind you.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, I think I would situate myself on the procurement deployment as well, just in terms of, I always thought that how vendors integrate the technology and how we purchase that technology and how it's marketed to us is kind of an interesting insertion vector into different organizations, and how that's deployed after is very interesting.
Thank you.
Can I be in two places at the same time?
Yes.
Sure.
My dissertation mostly work with recommendation systems and nudges on digital platforms. But I also work with the DH research, mostly on the data set creations on literature and annotating documents. So I'm up there in the curve, in the crisp and the bottom, the beginning.
That was one, and the other was,
Recommendation systems.
somebody point me there,
Up.
recommendations.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there we are.
I like this question as well because it's pointing us to, even if it's quite a helpful visualization, it has a lot of limits in terms of it's not a sequential thing, and our work is often touching most or many points on this curve. And even the way that I place the word are quite arbitrary in a way to help us think of all the different dimensions, but there's a lot of gray zones in how we think about how the concepts move and interact with one another. So maybe if we have one or two more courageous people who want to place themselves.
I now can read it if I go play. I'm trained as an ethnographer of science, so now I realize I'm right at the tippy top of the bump, studying lab practices and that sort of thing.
Anyone else? Anyone else see themselves somewhere entirely different on this curve?
And online, of course.
Thank you. Before locating myself, just asking why community impact is available 2 times. Maybe I missed this part. On
Because there are a
right
lot of
side.
impacts.
Yeah,
No,
I can
I'm
find there
joking.
2 times. Okay. We didn't know that. Okay, that was just a question. Okay, myself, somewhere between content moderation and public trust, but for me, a bit missing the individual or organizational trust. So this is maybe a bit more complex if we want to think in context of trust. Just for me, because I'm coming from this research field, but yeah, somewhere there. Thank you for that.
So I think where I'm at would be maybe community impact, because Meaghan helped me out with an undergrad workshop where we talked about how students felt about AI, but where I want to be, or where I'm aspiring to be, would be more on the left side, in where is it? Design justice, because I think that would be really cool. I'm also like very arts oriented.
Hi.
Yeah, I would like to add one more to the security of the model, like developing the platform. So we have to keep in the center. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That gives us a really cool visualization of some of the attendees. Thank you for everyone who volunteered. We'll now pass the scenarios, and on this sheet, I will reshare my screen. All right. So you will also have a copy online. On the sheet of paper, there is a scenario of a Canadian alternative to large streaming services with a couple of quirks. And as a team, you will get two of the dimensions. So the first table can start with dimensions 1 and 2, the second table on 3 and 4, the third on 5 and 6, the fourth on 1 and 2, and online, let's say 1 and 2 as well. And think through how these different sets of dimension unfold. What does it raise in the scenario when you own in on these and ask questions around these? So I will now I'll pass the scenario in person, and online we can move to the scenario in a breakout room. We'll work for 15-20 minutes, how the discussion go, and then move to a different set of dimension. Sounds good? Wonderful.
Just a note to those of us on Zoom, we've opened up a breakout room. Fenric is going to be in there in a moment also to help moderate. But if you want to work on one of the scenarios with the group there, just pop on in and pop out and we'll help you in the chat.
Yeah, and like, it's like or something. Yes.
Yes. I'm just. Sorry. Yeah. I'm just gonna try it. I'm getting it into this. Yeah. Oh, there you go. One thing about the idea when you come to your life, is it or is it hard to say knowledge or interact? Thinking of getting the things that are being done, I don't even know that they're being done. Anything that's secure. It's so far. Generate more. Exactly. Yeah. Where will the system go out? So yeah, if I'm doing location or numbers. I think that's it.
Audio AI algorithm, right? Like we were saying about metadata, how to be tagged as code, like that's a very old-fashioned way to do it, always tagging something. Whereas new AI systems are actually they have to work, with the audio. I'll say this sound, it's I'm saying it's not the AI, it's the enablement that's been done. Previous study, so now the machine learning is based on the previous study, and what's going now is the 5 years of influence. Yeah. You know, you can do it. I think the 5 years, for they do not have a fully. Okay. All in there, then we're you know what I mean? Nope. Robot armor. Okay, I was drafting in this car that and you're the best you build the first design for it. We installed in Ontario. More money power. But you can't do that.
Hi, everyone. I don't want to. I'm interrupting your lively conversation to encourage you to move to the. Oh. to encourage you to move to the following set of dimensions. So if you were working on dimension 1 and 2, so I think this table was working on impact and bias, you can move to 3 and 4. And so that would be free software and sustainability. Similarly, the second one can move to the next 2 and so forth. And I'll go through, make sure that everybody has new sets of dimension for the next 15 minutes or so, and then we'll reconvene as a group. Thank you.
So it means like, you know, I'm pretty locked into my little Apple iOS right here. Because I've got a lot on there. Yeah, yeah. Forget that idea. So I don't, but if I start to. Yeah. Something about that. Like this one is like so like it's. And I did. But the real question with our harmony cube. Are we moving to? Well, maybe not. Okay. As contrast with Microsoft. And some, and double. Open means that you can go into the code and change it. Okay. It's public and. When you start evolving Do it.
everyone for your lively conversation and for sharing all your creative ideas. We'll do a share back to get a chance to hear what the other tables have discussed, what were some key takeaways. I'll go around with a mic, let people get settled back into a large group mode, and yes. I'll also reconvene the online group.
I think that we're looking at, I think certainly the two things that this will be.
We're just closing up the breakout room. We can do a little tour. 27 seconds, it's going to close.
All right. So is there a table that would like to share first some of the key takeaways, what they learned, what struck them, what potential for change the conversation created, what struck you? Welcome back to the people online as well.
Just to catch you up, those joining us back from Zoom from the breakout room, we're just doing, Meaghan is doing a tour around the table and kind of seeing if anyone from the table wants to report their findings, what happened. Over to Meaghan.
Thank you. So I think the thing that stuck out, at least to me personally, as we were talking, was as we were discussing standards and regulation, I found that we were also talking a lot about impact and bias as well, like which types of artists would be affected by this, whose music would be included on the artist side, but then on the user side, like are they paying for the service? How is the service making money? And then on that basis, how is it affecting the user? And then what they would hear. So kind of, I think as we discussed each one, we were kind of jumping around the dimensions a little bit. And I think that's kind of representative of the topic of AI. So that's what stood out to me, is that it's kind of hard to just focus on one part of it to get an answer. But, you do need to jump across each one, and it's almost hard to even stay on one of them. I hope that helped.
Yes, yeah, that's wonderful. I think it illustrates the I got a few questions about the clarity of some of them, and I think this brings the muddiness into the conversation as well. Anything else from this table? Anything that wasn't captured by the dimensions?
Yeah, one thing that we started discussing a little bit was how it would, I'm not sure exactly where this would fit, but how the system would identify, for example, like a linguistic ability, if it was introducing new music, how it would know about their language preferences or language abilities, and how it would be able to read that information, and then where that would be stored, and if that would be sold, or how that data would be handled. So yeah, that was one other area that we spent quite a bit of time discussing.
Awesome. Yeah, the other table. Shivat.
So we have some doubts regarding the standards and the regulation. So the AI generated music, so who will be holding the copyrights to that music, or how will the licensing for that kind of work will do? And if that content, as the AI generated music is obviously inspired with other music, that's the data. So that should not be, if there can be a chances of plagiarism as well, maybe with the AI generated music. So I'm not sure how with this, the law around it will work.
I love that our technical team jumped into the The regulations and standards. Yeah, it's tough questions, and I think you raised some really key points. Some key takeaways from table one who really used the paper a little bit. You can all.
I'll just pass it around. Okay, so with impact, we talked about, we were wondering where the data that Harmony Q, like the data that it was trained on, where did it come from? So when a song is defined as cozy, how does the system know that? So is it pulling from user playlists that were labeled online? Is it pulling from data labelers, from artists? Yeah, and obviously also it's pulling from artists to make AI generated music. Yeah, and thinking about where this data goes back to. So will user data be fed back to the company or to data brokers? Thinking about who might be harmed, obviously artists whose music gets played. If we're thinking about 30-second limits to music, that's a limitation on the kinds of music that gets played. Also, the company is deciding what's diverse, which might lead to stereotypes or might exclude certain kinds of work.
In terms of bias, we were questioning the ethics of data use. And we assumed that the data that would be collected from users would be location data, behavioral, and likely unreliable. And we also figured that there'd be some competition created between AI and musicians if there's going to be AI generated content on this app, as well as bias in tagging audio sounds, as in like, what is cozy, like Nicole mentioned. So it's kind of the subjective history based on previous forms of labeling. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about free software? Sure. So we also talked a bit about the notion of free software. Like either do we go for like more open source alternatives to current platforms are very closed, but even free in the financial term, like how do we pay artists and like the system of royalties? Do we have to like try to, let's say, place those new technologies inside the existing systems, or do we have to invent new systems altogether? See the system of royalties if it has to be completely revamped, and those like little path we have, let's say.
And finally, we were also able to discuss sustainability a bit, and we're wondering about the supposedly green data centers. Does it really exist if we want to have a project to be sustainable? And there's also this idea of importance of what this project really, like, as we know, AI has an impact on environment as everything is on a data center. And therefore we wonder, is this project, for example, with music, really bringing sufficient positive impact compared to the negative ones it might have on the environment, for example, to be pursued? Or should we go with more pressing matters, simply, but simply, yeah.
Thank you. That was great. I don't know if we have anyone else from online who is still here and would like to share some of their key takeaways. Yes.
I think one of the things that was a really interesting discussion that came up online, and this is raised by a few people, so I'm just kind of echoing what happened, what came up, but also this term diversity that came up, because diversity without actually some clear instructions of what that means can be quite meaningless. And so how trying to ensure that there's clear values and design and what counts, and particularly aware that certain artists and creators might have been historically marginalized, like, you know, what music was, what counts as mainstream music and what doesn't count, as we're learning from Beyonce even today, is something that is really part of a longer conversation about music and what music gets recommended. And so all to say is I thought that was a really important point, is that unless you're very intentional about specifying what diversity means and actually trying to build that into the design of the project, then it might actually fail to accomplish what it hopes to, what the change it seeks to make.
Thank you. With that, we have heard back from all the groups, all the table. Thank you everyone for participating and for really engaging with the tools and thinking through them. I learned a lot, and I'm really happy everybody seemed to have been able to engage with them as well. So let's join hands, and thank you everyone for coming.
And I think one thing just to say in the closing remarks, and I really want to appreciate everybody for being here, is that we're very much sharing what we're working with and working on. So, you know, one of the parts is that if you're trying to understand how we're trying to operationalize this, and we had a great question online about what does this mean? How does it impact our work? Is that this is the type of questions that we'll use to build out a project to try to understand what are the stages that when we're thinking about how to do a deployment, these are some of the steps that we're trying to build and include. So these questions are really meant in one way to kind of be accessible and really prompt an interdisciplinary conversation. So it was really, I think, fantastic to see how you all were willing to engage and could engage with these questions, but also just to kind of open up and show how we're trying to approach and really lead with this responsible AI. And I think part of it, and Meaghan and I joke about this in some ways, is that this is an experiment. And we see ourselves as a research institute, and we're trying to figure out what does it mean to do responsible AI in our development. And I think really it's through a lot of leadership from our whole team, and especially Meaghan, that has really made this possible. I think it's also really possible thanks to Valeria and the technical team for being so open-minded. And I think hopefully as all members of the Concordia community, you understand this is something that we're hoping to share and pass back to you. So if you want workshops, if you're trying to understand how to deal with responsible AI in your projects, please think of the Institute as a resource and think of us as how to make your projects possible. So again, I want to thank you so much. And again, credit for Meaghan and Lindsay and Valeria and Alex and everybody else and Shubhang from the team and Matali as well. I'm going to forget everybody's names. But anyways, I just want to thank everybody from the Institute for making this possible as well. So with that, here we go. And there's free food in the back, so please enjoy it and, you know, catch up with each other.
Thanks, Fenway. Thanks everyone else for coming in today for this conversation, workshop, participating, everyone online. We're going to be closing up the live stream and the Zoom now, but just a reminder, this is available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to revisit or share there. And please join us again later and have a fantastic afternoon.